We're still working in Unit 5, and we are in Chapter 33 at the very bottom of page 1230. We're going to be working on this case study where we're going to build a calculator, and we're just going to follow along with the example here and try to do all the tasks that are defined. Now, I don't want you to type this stuff in. That's not really the point here, is to build up your coding typing skills. So if you could bring up your textbook files, and I just want to point out where the contents are located depending on which version you downloaded. Like if you grabbed all the chapters, where all of them land in the same folder, and then you'll do what I did, which is you'll come down here and go, where's chapter 33? And the answer to that is it's up here in book, and then you can see that we have the JSF2 demo that we've been working on. So all the stuff is inside that folder. And then depending on what type of file it is, you'll find it in various locations. So you'll see some of the Java files are here. And I'm backtracking here. And some of the web files are in here. So you just need to know resources are in this folder. Notice they even have the CSS. So as we are working, I'm going to be grabbing the files and pulling them into our project. So the first step is going to be to create a new managed bean named calculator. And the scope is going to be request once again, and this will be the name. And you can go ahead and do that manually. And just as a little bit of a refresher, if you don't remember how to accomplish that, you would come in and you create a new managed bean. I right-clicked on source packages. Now, normally it will know where to put them. I guess I'm a little bit of a control freak that way. But I want to make sure it ends up in the right folder as I'm working. Now, I'm actually not going to complete this process because I'm going to manually drag the file in. And I actually suggest that you do that if you have the files available. And this one is calculator JSF bean. That's this one. So let me get NetBeans in the background here. And then I'm just going to drop it right on top of the folder. And of course, I put it in the wrong spot. Oh, you know what's happening here? You know why it's in the wrong spot? Notice that these other files here, if I open them, they have this up at the top of the file, which designates the package. So I'm going to actually copy that, go to my calculator. Oh, no, it's actually in there. Okay. Well, let's just double check why it's not registering. All right. That was easy enough. Did you guys notice what I did? It had a red underline. It said, press Alt-Enter for a hint, and I did. So instead of Control Space, like you do in Eclipse, it's Alt-Enter. And then it came up with an option, and it said move it to the correct folder. And the other fix, of course, would have been just to pick it up and move it into the right folder. Okay, so now that file is there, let's just take a quick glance at some of the contents. Can you guys see that code okay? Is it big enough for you?
The JSF demo folder that we're pulling stuff out of on Blackboard.
I thought I did. Let me, that's a good point, Kevin. Let me take.
I wasn't sure I got it last time because I was definitely pulling pages into it.
Yeah, I have it in the root here. This is the web bunch. Let me just make sure I have it for you guys. Yep, it's right here. So you can, it's right in Unit 5 as a zip file. So those of you watching the video at home, you can get all the source files from right here, so you don't have to worry about trying to dig them up. So I don't want you to end up typing all this stuff in. I always get some people that do. I don't know why, but they do. There's something to be learned by typing it into, I suppose, and that is how they the IDE behaves. All right, so let's just take a quick look through here. Notice that once again we have this at sign named with a value of calculator, so that's basically assigning a name to it. The request is scoped. We have some privates here that we are declaring, and then a bunch of getters and setters. Then we have some methods built in to do all the basic math functions. And that's it. It's not a very complicated thing. And you guys should have at some point in probably a couple of languages learned how to do a calculator. So the approach here, remember, is now instead of using like Visual Studio to do some of this stuff, we are using Java to run server side to dish out the web page that will create the interface and then react to the button press to do the actual work. So the goal is to create what we see in the book, basically this. So we're going to have 3 labels, 3 text fields that will accept numbers, and 4 buttons to do the work. Very, very basic. And we have the first part of our code is complete. All right, and then we're going to pull in the calculator XHTML file. So let's go grab that one. That is going to be a couple folder levels up in web. And that's going to go into the web pages. So I'm just dropping it right on top of the folder so it pops in here. Again, let's take a look at what's going on here, make a little sense of it. And you guys have figured out by now that whenever we see these H prefixes, that they're set up to create certain HTML elements for us. Not quite with the same syntax as HTML, but it's very easy to figure out what's going on. I do want to point your attention to the fact that we have some expressions here, and I was mentioning in the other video I was recording earlier that doesn't that look Ruby-like? People that are in the Ruby class, it really does, and that's not by accident. That whole structure, the way things are put together, is a common approach. So we can actually programmatically drop certain elements into our form based upon these expressions, which is a pretty powerful thing. There's not really a lot of code here. It's pretty straight ahead. Now, we're going to go ahead at this point and run this. So make sure everything is saved if you've been playing with it. So I'm just hitting save on each one of those. And then I do not want to just hit run, because what happens if I just hit run? What is it even running? I have 2 versions of the project, right? Yeah, it's going to run index, but what we want is to run this one. So we just right click on it and run. All right, so there's the interface. Let's give it a shot. Two divided by 2 is 1. Of course, you could really mess with people and put a little formula in there that gives you a totally wrong answer. All right, we don't want to do that. All right, so if everybody got it to work, everybody's good? All right, let's move on to our next topic here, which is session tracking. And once again, we have this little correlation with some of the stuff we're doing in our Ruby on Rails class. And that is basically, how do we keep track of people that come to our website and their session? So if they log into a website, how do we know that they're still there, or they haven't come back, or their session has expired? If you think about a lot of websites you go to, you log in, and then if you let it sit for too long and you go back, it times out, right? Sometimes it doesn't, and it keeps track of your session. Now, depending on how you set up your website, you can also offer to people, keep me signed in, or remember me. that kind of thing. Um, and then you have to be careful with those things. But typically, session tracking, uh, depending on what language you're using, is often done with cookies. So a cookie is written to your system, and then by virtue of writing the cookie, they can look and see the session ID, then go back to their database or however they do it, and say, aha, yeah, that session, we can reinitiate that session. And if you want to think about some of that now as we go into shopping season, think about like Amazon.com. Boy, they never forget what you put in your cart, right? And that's all done using mechanisms like that. All right, as we're working on rendering these pages, we just discovered here in the classroom that there's been this addition um, to NetBeans that's pretty cool. If you come into Tools and then go to Options, you'll notice that right up at the top of the General area, they have a choice of what web browser you want to use. And mine was defaulting to whatever the default system browser was, which was confusing me a little because mine is actually not Internet Explorer, it's Edge, although I use Chrome more often. But then I noticed that they have the embedded WebKit browser included, and that's very similar to what happens in Dreamweaver if you're working with that product at all, where you can render the pages directly within the product, and that's exactly what this does. So if I go ahead and run our calculator, you're going to see that it just launches it directly in to our interface here, which is pretty cool. So you have the capability of doing stuff right within development environment. Now, it might not be the prettiest of things, um, but it is right there, and you don't have to be switching screens. So I think that can be kind of helpful, especially if we're doing basic things. That never is a substitute, of course, for testing in an actual browser, but it's something to consider. Okay, let's go back to talking about session tracking here. And the thing that I want to mention is that when you are working with a web application, and you have to remember, if you haven't heard this before, that web applications and the protocols that run the web, the HTTP one in particular, don't have um, a state that they maintain. So they're called stateless. And in other words, we don't really keep track of what's happening. Now, when we do that little setting where we are creating a new project and we set up a request scope, basically what happens with a request scope is that we click on something on the screen, it goes out to wherever the server side stuff is, it does what it does, it comes back, and it's done. The request is terminated, it no longer exists. Now you can change your scope so that you can run it on both the application level and the session level. And in order to keep track of the session, we're going to have to do a little bit of work to get that to happen. So those are one of the reasons why we adjust the scopes. Now the other thing that we can do is we can do a view scope. And if you look right here, um, so a request scope bean is created once for request. A view scope bean is created once for the view. All right. So think about what the view is. The view is the thing that we're getting on the screen, right? And that's really what we're contending with, at least at this point. So let's give this example here a try. So we're going to pull in this bean here called guest number. So let's go ahead and do that, pull that into our project. It's not what I meant to do with it. Let's try that one more time. And see, I did exactly the same thing I did last time, didn't I? Yeah, are you guys having the same issue? All right, well now it moved it and it fixed it, so not a big deal. All right, notice that we have a change now that we're changing the scope. It's going to be based upon the view. So we have that file put in. And then ultimately what's going to happen is we're going to create um, a application that does this. You know, did you ever play high-low when you were kids? So you guess a number between 1 and 100. Somebody picks it and you try to like maybe have a certain number of tries before you lose. So of course, you know, if I picked like 77, you know, and then I guessed 50, you'd say too low. If I guessed 80, too high. And you keep going until you find the right number. So that's what we're simulating here. All right, so that is what we're doing now. We need to also get um, this XHTML file thrown in. Let's take a look at that one. So you see this is pretty simple. We have our basic structure there with a form kind of holding everything. And then in our input text, notice that we have this little expression here. And guess number, of course, refers to this file. And then inside that file, we'll have guess string. And then it just comes in here and works with the getters and setters, and then throws out a response saying too high or too low. And I'm not sure if they have any other components here for us. Apparently not. Let's go give it a shot and see what it does. So I'm right-clicking on the guess number. And now I'm getting an error message from the server. So we'll see if we can figure out what the problem is. So I'm going to pause the video here for a moment and try to figure it out. We've been spending quite a bit of time here in class trying to figure out this guess number problem and have not come up with a solution. So we're actually going to terminate this video here and move on to another one. So don't feel bad if you didn't get it to work, because we didn't either. But if you did get it to work, please let me know what you did to make it work. We made sure that all our syntax was okay. And that didn't really seem to fix anything, and we tried a couple little tweaks to some of the aspects, such as changing the scopes, and that didn't do anything. All right, so that video ends here. Move on to the next one.